Welcome everyone to Things Around 8. Dear friends, in this video, we will talk about the Venezuelan presidential elections that took place this Sunday, July 28, and all the allegations of fraud surrounding this process. And if you are not yet subscribed to the channel, subscribe now and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any news. This Sunday, July 28th, the long-awaited presidential election took place in Venezuela, pitting on one side Nicolas Maduro, political heir to Hugo Chavez and in power since 2013, and on the other side, Edmundo Gonzalez, the only strong candidate that the opposition managed to register, after Maria Corina Machado was hunted for 15 years by the Venezuelan courts controlled by Maduro. Days before the elections, several polls indicated a clear advantage for the opposition, with Edmundo Gonzalez even appearing with more than 40 percentage points ahead of Maduro. However, contrary to all the polls and exit polls conducted this Sunday, the Venezuelan National Electoral Council reported that the winner was Nicolas Maduro, with 51% of the votes. But how was this possible? The answer is simple, and many already knew it very well. The reason for Maduro's announced victory, contrary to all the polls, was, according to the Venezuelan opposition, electoral fraud. However, it began long before the elections themselves, with Maduro persecuting and removing his main opponents, especially Maria Corina Machado. In total, 72 people, including candidates, advisors, members and employees of opposition parties, have been arrested in recent months. Preventing and removing opponents from elections is a very common practice in dictatorships and autocracies. And we only need to look at what happened in Russia in 2024, with Vladimir Putin winning the elections with almost 90% of the votes, after neutralizing all of his main opponents. By doing this, dictators and autocrats can tell the world that they are holding elections, when in practice they are simply personally choosing candidates they know they can easily defeat. However, in the case of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro did not count on Maria Corina, even if she was ousted, being able to mobilize the entire opposition, directing all the votes that would originally have gone to her to Edmundo Gonzalez. It was thanks to this effort by Maria Corina that the opposition candidate managed to open up a lead of more than 40 points over Nicolas Maduro in some polls. This advantage forced Maduro to take more drastic measures. If distancing himself from his opponents was no guarantee of victory in the elections, Maduro went ahead with outright electoral fraud, with his first measure being the complete closure of borders to prevent the entry of international observers. As the name suggests, international observers usually monitor elections around the world, observing and noting any possible irregularities, both in the voting and in the vote-counting phase. So if a dictator wants to rig an election, the first step is to prevent observers from entering, with over 100 observers having been prevented from entering Venezuela, and many having been deported. With international observers banned, Maduro felt more comfortable taking more extreme measures, such as closing down polling stations that he knew from previous polls that Edmundo Gonzalez would win by a large margin. Dozens of polling stations in Venezuela either did not open or were simply closed many hours earlier than scheduled to prevent the opposition from receiving even more votes. To this end, Maduro used his police and army and institutions that he completely controlled. And finally, during the vote-counting phase, the National Electoral Council, CNE, an organization created by Hugo Chavez in 1999 to organize and monitor the elections, including the vote counting, refused to release all the vote records. According to Maria Corina, the CNE only released 40% of the records, in which Edmundo Gonzalez appears with 70% of the votes. This means that, in practice, the CNE simply said that Maduro won with 51% of the votes, without providing any evidence of this victory. It is important to remember that the CNE is completely controlled by Nicolas Maduro, and its president, directors, inspectors and delegates were all appointed to their positions by the Maduro regime. Therefore, in practical terms, it is Maduro who counts the votes in the elections. All of this led the Venezuelan opposition to speak out, with Maria Corina accusing Maduro of having rigged the elections. He also said that, based on the results released by the CNE, Edmundo Gonzalez won with 70% of the votes. At the international level, the reaction was also swift, with several countries such as Argentina, Chile, Uruguay and Spain stating that they will not recognize these results until all the votes can be audited. Javier Milei of Argentina went even further, calling Maduro a dictator and calling on the Venezuelan military to stand up and protect democracy. Something we know perfectly well will not happen, given the fact that Nicolas Maduro completely controls the military. For years, Maduro has bought the loyalty of the military through mass promotions, turning Venezuela into the country with the largest number of colonels and generals on the entire planet, with the main Venezuelan commanders being integrated by Maduro into the Los Sols cartel, an international organization accused of smuggling hundreds of tons of drugs to the United States. Through this measure, Maduro knows that his commanders will do everything they can to prevent him from falling from power, because they know that while he is in power, nothing and no one will be able to interfere in the millionaire business of the Los Sols cartel. Since the population in Venezuela is 100% unarmed, the fact that Maduro controls the military means that there is no chance of a civil war, since for that to happen, both sides need to be armed. But in Venezuela, only Maduro's side has weapons. Therefore, the most that could happen are demonstrations and protests that, as happened in the recent past, will be completely crushed by the police and military of the Maduro regime. However, despite so many allegations of fraud, some countries have already congratulated Maduro on his victory, such as Cuba, Iran, Nicaragua, Syria, China, and Vladimir Putin's Russia, the country from which, as I mentioned earlier, Maduro was inspired to carry out many of the fraudulent techniques he used in these elections. All of this indicates that the Venezuelan presidential elections will not be recognized by many countries, with Maduro continuing to be seen by many nations as an illegitimate president and the leader of a dictatorial regime where any and all forms of opposition are crushed by the state apparatus created by the regime. This contributes to keeping Venezuela increasingly isolated and the target of increasingly strong and restrictive sanctions. At the time of editing this video, the Brazilian government said it was waiting for the release of the remaining minutes, still refusing to recognize Maduro's victory. And if you are not yet subscribed to the channel, subscribe now and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any news.